The moment my husband told me to apologize or leave, I realized something terrifying. He never expected me to choose leave. The argument started at a family gathering packed with relatives, opinions, and years of unresolved favoritism. By the end of the night, everyone had taken his side. His mother called me disrespectful. His sister called me selfish. Then my husband pointed toward the door and said, "Apologize right now or get out." I looked at our 3-year-old son sleeping in the guest room. Then I looked back at my husband and quietly decided that by next week, neither of us would be there. My name is Hannah, and I was 34 years old when my husband gave me an ultimatum he never expected me to accept. We had been married for 6 years. We had a 3-year-old son named Oliver. And for most of that marriage, I spent more time keeping peace with my husband's family than enjoying my actual life. Mark wasn't a bad person. At least, not in the way people usually mean. He worked hard, loved our son, paid his share of the bills. But whenever his family was involved, something changed. He stopped being my husband and became their son, their brother, their defender. No matter what happened, his mother had opinions about everything. How I cooked, how I dressed, how I parented, even how I spoke to Oliver. At first, I tried to be understanding. Then I tried being patient. Then I spent years pretending the comments didn't bother me. Because every time I complained, Mark said the same thing. That's just how they are. The family gathering that changed everything happened on a Saturday afternoon. His parents were hosting a large barbecue. Dozens of relatives filled the backyard. Kids running around. Music playing. Everyone laughing. At least on the surface. Oliver was sitting beside me eating fruit when my mother-in-law suddenly walked over. She looked at his plate and frowned. "You're still limiting sugar?" I nodded politely. His pediatrician had recommended it. She immediately rolled her eyes. "That's ridiculous." Several relatives looked over. I felt the familiar tension building. "I'm following his doctor's advice," I said calmly. Before she could respond, Mark's sister Rachel joined the conversation. "Oh, come on." Hannah reads one parenting article and suddenly thinks she's an expert. Several people laughed. My cheeks burned. I forced a smile. Normally, I would have let it go. But something inside me felt tired, exhausted. Maybe because it wasn't the first comment, or the 100th. Maybe because I realized Oliver was listening. "I don't think following medical advice is something to be mocked," I replied. The table went quiet. Rachel immediately looked offended. My mother-in-law folded her arms. "There you go again." There I go what? Being disrespectful. The word hit me like a slap. Disrespectful. Because I defended myself. Around us, relatives began joining the conversation. Everyone had an opinion. Everyone suddenly became an expert on my behavior. The story transformed within minutes. I wasn't defending myself anymore. I was apparently attacking the family. I looked at Mark, waiting, hoping, expecting him to say something. Anything. A simple sentence. "Hannah has a point. Let's move on." Enough. Instead, he sat there silently, watching. And somehow that hurt even more. Then Rachel made another comment. Something about how difficult I always made family events. That was when I finally pushed back. Not yelling. Not insulting anyone. Just telling the truth. I explained how years of criticism had affected me. How exhausting it was. How tired I was of being the family's favorite target. The reaction was immediate. Everyone turned on me. Every single person. Including Mark. He stood up. His face tight with frustration. "Hannah, stop." I stared at him.
No.
The backyard became silent. Mark looked embarrassed.
Angry.
Cornered. Then he said the words that changed my life. "Apologize right now, or get out." For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. I looked around the table. Every face expected the same thing. They expected surrender. They expected me to apologize, like I always had before. Instead, I stood up, walked inside, collected Oliver's things, and left. No argument. No dramatic speech. No tears. Just silence. That night, after putting Oliver to bed, I sat alone in the kitchen replaying the entire day. And for the first time, I saw the truth. The problem wasn't that argument. The problem was 6 years of arguments. 6 years of being expected to absorb every insult for the sake of peace. Around midnight, I remembered something. 3 years earlier, an old friend living overseas had offered me a position at her company. At the time, I declined. The next morning, I sent her a message. I didn't expect much. She replied within an hour. The position was still available. The company had expanded, and they needed someone immediately. 3 days later, after several long conversations and careful planning, I opened my laptop. Then I bought 2 tickets. One for me, one for Oliver. As the confirmation email arrived, I stared at the screen for a long time. For the first time in years, I wasn't asking anyone for permission. And nobody in my husband's family had any idea what was coming. The hardest part wasn't buying the tickets. The hardest part was staying quiet afterward. For the next 2 weeks, I acted completely normal. I took Oliver to preschool, went to work, answered messages, made dinner, smiled when people expected me to smile. Meanwhile, I was rebuilding my future one checklist at a time. My friend Sophia helped me arrange everything. The position she offered wasn't a dream job. It was something better, a fresh start. The company was located in New Zealand, and after several interviews, they formally offered me the role. I accepted. Then I spent days handling practical details. Housing, paperwork, school options for Oliver, financial planning. Everything was done carefully and legally. Every decision revolved around one question. Would this create a healthier life for my son? If the answer was yes, I moved forward. If the answer was no, I didn't. During that same period, Mark behaved exactly as I expected. He assumed I would eventually apologize. At first, he barely mentioned the argument. Then he started sending messages. Short ones. You ready to talk? We should move past this. Mom feels bad. That last one almost made me laugh. Not because it was funny, because nobody seemed concerned about how I felt. Only how everyone else felt. His mother called repeatedly. Rachel sent texts about family unity. Several relatives reached out. All of them wanted peace. None of them wanted accountability. I stopped arguing. Stopped defending myself. Stopped explaining. Silence turned out to be surprisingly powerful. People can't twist your words when you stop giving them words to twist. 3 weeks later, everything was ready. The apartment, the job, the school, the support network, the tickets, the future. The night before our departure, Mark came home carrying takeout from my favorite restaurant. An old peace offering, one that usually worked. We sat at the kitchen table while Oliver slept upstairs. I think we've dragged this out long enough, he said. I looked at him quietly. I agree. He smiled slightly, relieved, certain he had won. I knew you'd come around. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. The next morning, while he was at work, Oliver and I headed to the airport. I left a letter on the kitchen counter. Nothing cruel. Nothing dramatic. Just honest. I explained why I was leaving, what needed to change, and why I refused to keep teaching our son that disrespect should be tolerated to keep other people comfortable. My phone exploded halfway through airport security. Calls, texts, voicemails, dozens of them. Mark had found the letter. I didn't answer. Not until several hours later. By then, Oliver was asleep beside me on the plane. Hannah, Mark said the moment I picked up. His voice sounded different. Panicked. You're actually doing this? I looked out the window. The clouds stretched endlessly beneath us. Yes. This is insane. No, I said calmly. What's insane is thinking I'd spend the next 20 years apologizing for having boundaries. He was silent. For the first time since I'd met him, he didn't have an argument ready. The months that followed weren't easy. Starting over never is. But something remarkable happened. Oliver flourished. He became happier, more confident, more relaxed, and honestly, so did I. The distance forced Mark to confront things he'd ignored for years. The family dynamics, the favoritism, the way I had been treated. For the first time, he could see it without everyone else's voices drowning out reality. Eventually, he apologized. A real apology. Not for one argument. For years of choosing comfort over courage. His mother and sister apologized too, though much later, and only after realizing they no longer controlled the situation. Today, my relationship with Mark is healthier than it has ever been. Not because I forgave everything immediately, but because boundaries finally existed. Looking back, the most important part wasn't the plane ticket. It wasn't the new country. It wasn't even leaving. It was finally understanding that respect isn't something you beg for. It's something you acquire. The night my husband told me to apologize or leave, he thought he was giving me a punishment. He never realized he was giving me a choice. And choosing myself changed everything.